Ooh, that was bad. Maple syrup. Hey, that's it. That's all. It's like 8 bars, like I told you. 8 really
Perfect.
bad bars, and I started off on a chord that was not really a chord. So that's how things are going today. And we're here. I'm flying solo today. Erica's not here. Alar's not here. I feel kind of alone, but I am not, because today I have with us Jean-Alix Duplantier, who comes to us from out on the West Coast, I believe. You're on the West Coast, right? Correct?
Believe it or not, I'm actually a remote employee, so I am calling from the center of the nation in Oklahoma.
Oh, well, there you go. That's awesome, actually. I think it's
Yeah.
great that there are remote employees at game companies. There should be more remote employees at game
Yes,
companies.
I think it's moving in that direction, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the last couple of years have proven to us that the juggernaut doesn't stop rolling just because we can't all be in the same place together. And I mean, I keep talking to people about just how big the numbers are that were posted by companies like Wizards and uh, since the pandemic started, because people refound their love of D&D in a lot of ways, right?
Yep.
My family, my two kids and my wife and I, we bought boxes of Magic, and we did booster drafts for the entire first year. So, I think there's something to be said for analog gaming being in person and yet remote all at the same time, and I think that's totally fine. So welcome, Jean-Alix. So tell us about yourself. What do you do? Why do you do it? And more importantly, later on, we'll get into how. But tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Sure. I am by trade and train a graphic designer. I specialize in publications, which, as right off the bat, I'm sure you can tell that's a perfect fit for the gaming industry because we make a lot of books, and
Yeah.
all the companies do. So last year, I walked away from my commercial career and decided to try to get into gaming full time. I had done some freelancing, but I decided it was long past due for me to try to do something that I loved rather than doing what I needed to do to survive.
Right.
So I was very fortunate to hook up with Connor Alexander, the creator of Coyote and Crow, and he and I and his amazing team of writers and artists made the beautiful core rulebook for Coyote and Crow, which I'm very proud of.
It's
Um,
lovely.
it is a beautiful book. I have a copy right here, actually. I'm not going to flip through it for the audience, but if you see this on your local shelf, this is a gorgeous book.
Yeah,
Flip
if
right
you
through.
do see it and you are at all interested in RPGs or indigenization of futures and pasts and everything, grab that book. It is a wonderful game, but also a great read, and in no small part to like the layout. I think the layout is top notch. It's great.
Well, thank you. That would be me actually.
Yeah.
So the Coyote and Crow kind of got me kickstarted. It put Nitro right in the tank. I ended up self-publishing an adventure and creating my own imprint, the Lost Cartographers Guild. I only have one product though. It's an adventure that I wrote for Pathfinder Infinite because Pathfinder Infinite, which is kind of analogous to the DM's Guild, which I'm sure a lot of people are
Yep.
familiar with. I wanted to. It was opening October last year, and I really wanted to get like a full blown adventure on there because there's a lot of great content on DM's Guild and other self publishing tools,
Yep.
but it's not often you see a full blown original adventure path like a 100-page, 150-page book, and that's what I wanted to do. So I went about writing and
You didn't aim low.
oh no, not gonna go for the 12-page PDF. No, we went for the moon. So my partner and I spent 3 or 4 weeks or so writing the actual content of the book, about 60,000 words.
Wow.
And then I, of course, designed and laid out the book myself. Um, the reason why there's only one of those, though, is because not long after that, I got a call from a recruiter from Wizards of the Coast. So that's how that worked out. So I kind of went from 0 to 60 in just a span of a few months.
That's great. But I mean,
Yeah,
that really does show you how, effortful work and putting yourself out there can reap rewards, right? When people start seeing your name attached to projects that are like interesting, or like the Pathfinder Infinite one is like that's kind of large for what it is, right? Like,
Mhm.
and Cody and Crow did bonkers on Kickstarter,
Yes.
for a first run indie press RPG that isn't swords and sorcery. It did great, right? It
Yeah.
exceeded everybody's expectations in a wonderful way,
Oh yeah.
and having your name attached to that is not a bad thing, right? And it shows that you're capable. And then people who are looking for capable people will find you somehow, right? Which is great.
Yeah, and that's how it happened. I had applied to Wizards for an internal publishing position where they have these internal world guides for the various planes of Magic, and I really wanted to get in on that. I didn't get that job, but they found a place for me that I fit really well in. So yeah, and like you said, it's that purposeful work when you create something and you put it out there and you can point to it and say, I did that,
Yeah,
then it makes all the difference in the world when it comes to recruiters who are in the gaming space, because they're going to want to be able to see it, touch it, read it, show it to everyone else in the boardroom.
it's true. It's true. So a lot of people and a lot of designers out there, you might be one of them if you're listening. Hopefully you're not this person, but I was this person for a while where like everything lived up here in my head.
Mhm.
And it was perfect in my head. And until you put it like onto paper or electrons and it's tangible and people can like download and print it or use it and play it, it's not really a game. It's just an idea. And ideas are a dime a dozen in this industry. Everybody has them. We all have tons and tons of them. It's when you make a product and you ship it that you show that you can do all the things that it takes to get from point A to point B. Now there might be a point C, like with its fulfillment and all that kind of stuff, and throughput to the market and whatnot. But if you're a designer, you don't have to worry about that if all you need to do is get to the publisher. The publisher wants to know, can you make a good game, right?
Right.
And in your case, the publishers were asking, can they put together a product that looks professional, is laid out like it should be, and has, maybe some neat other features. And that's kind of why I have you here today, Jean, is because we wanted to talk about all those other things that you can do electronically with rules and books that you can't really do in print only format that will allow us to broaden the horizons and the amount of people, the types of people that can come and play games with us. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about your own imprint, which is Lost Cartographers Guild.
Well, it was created so that I had something, so that I had an imprint to put in that first book. The adventure path I wrote was called Arena: Sand of the Colosseum. It takes place in the Pathfinder universe, in the River Kingdoms in the city state of Timon, and the Timon is centered very much around its gladiatorial arena. So we created a whole world within a world for this book, and it felt important enough to us that we not just put our names on it, but put a stamp on it. So
Right.
we created the Lost Cartographers Guild, which is actually a reference to my Pathfinder's PC group name. That's what they refer to themselves as, the Lost Cartographers. So we use that as the imprint, and yeah, the long goal, the long horizon, is to make Arena a series of Pathfinder adventures. But understandably, the call up from Wizards kind of put that on hold for now.
Oh, for sure.
But I if anybody out there has played Arena or would like to try to play Arena Sand of the Coliseum, give it a crack. Maybe send me an email at the Lost Photographers Guild. Not I can send you a copy maybe just to try out and review. Be happy to hear what people think about it.
That's great. And so you're hoping someday maybe to come back to this product and
Yeah,
expand it with. Now, will they all be 150-page expansions, or will they be smaller because now
I hope
you've got a.
so.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Well,
I thought because you wrote the 150-page, like almost like a sub-core book that you just like have little missions coming off the sides. But
so
no.
I took a little bit of inspiration from the Pathfinder adventure series Kingmaker, which was a serialized adventure that at first was published in the magazine, Pilot magazine, but eventually got it spun out into a full series of books. And the way they did it is they had the Kingmakers had a city building system built inside of it,
Oh,
and
cool.
every time they expanded or every time they added a book to it, they expanded on that system. So the first one was like the Hexploration system where you explored via hex map. The second book had the city building. The third book had where you'd start building armies and things like that. And then, it blew out into math battles and all that kind of stuff. So they added to the complexity at every major chapter of the adventure. And that's kind of the same kind of idea I wanted to do with Arena.
Oh, that's neat. It's very, very cool. So let's talk about what we're here to talk about today. And by the way, I can't see the chats right now. I'm not sure what's wrong or right with them, but hopefully, if you're chatting, hopefully they'll pop up soon and I can get to them. Those of you out there watching, I am so sorry that I cannot see you, but I know you're there. I can see there's numbers. I just can't see what you're chatting about yet. So
Yeah.
just keep on chatting, and hopefully I'll catch up with you in a bit. But let's talk about PDF accessibility. So, for those of us who don't know what PDFs are, what are PDFs? And
Okay. PDFs, I mean, a portable document format. It is the universal file format for delivering text and graphics together as a file. So think of it as an electronic book, but not an ebook. That's a different thing.
right, so and that's the kind of interesting thing is that, uh, why? Oh, hey there, my comments started coming up. Okay, so Tim Brown said not really much here yet. Anyway, okay, that's fine. Hi, Tim. Um, why did the industry pick PDFs over things like ebook or EPUB or whatever else there might be?
So in PDFs really predated ebooks like
Yeah,
e-readers, e-ink. Those things came after PDFs. PDF is was patented by Adobe, and Adobe, of course, is the industry standard for illustration design. Video processing, and they have a large chunk of that market as well. So when it came to being able to transfer files from, say, your design desktop or your publishing house to a printer, that universal PDF language was what a lot of them settled on because they already had Adobe software.
right.
So PDF just really kind of naturally became the native format or the go-to format for electronic books.
And are there things that you can do in PDFs that you can't do in the other formats as well?
There are a lot of things you can do in PDFs. Ebooks are proprietary to the reader, right? So you have to have like your Kindle, Nook, something like that. So one of these e-ink devices, and the book has to be formatted for that device. On the other hand, PDF is more or less universal. If you have a
Right.
smartphone, if you have a PC, if you just have a Chromebook or an Android TV or whatever, you can read a PDF. You can open it, you can scroll through it, you
Oh,
can
that's true.
do
You could do
all the
that on like
things.
on a smart TV.
Yeah, in fact, I run D&D at home, and one of the things that I do is I use my various Google and Adobe plugin functionality to present things on screen on my big TV in my den for my players, as
Right.
opposed to like doing handouts. I can just put it on the wall,
Yeah.
and that's kind of all part of the accessibility of the PDF as opposed to something else.
Right. Okay, so we have this file format that is fairly universal that everybody
Mhm.
uses, that everybody knows, except we don't. We don't know the depths of the power that is hidden within the architecture of PDFs
Right.
and how somebody that's skilled like you can bring that to the forefront to allow people to read in different ways. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when it comes to designing for readability, this is something that goes beyond PDF. This is really something that goes back to the basics of design principles, especially publishing design principles. You have to consider the reader first of all, and most people read at a decent pace at a certain level, and that's fine and well. But you're going to have readers who have vision impairment. You're going to have readers who have learning disabilities and reading disabilities, and you have to be able to make the text accessible to as many of those people as possible. Not only just because you want your product out there for as many customers as possible, but also because really gaming is for everyone, and we don't want to ever exclude anyone because of a disability, right?
Right.
We want to make sure that everybody is at the table, as many people as possible at the table having fun. So when it comes to those design principles, you have to really go reach all the way back to the typography principles and apply those to your design, both in print and in PDF.
Right. So when you're making a PDF for print or a file for print
Mhm.
versus a file for electronically being read, is there a lot of difference? Does it end up being the same thing and you just manipulate it a little bit different in the PDF format, or what happens?
That depends on your intent. If your intent is, your book, if you're an indie publisher and your goal is to get your book onto the shelves of your local game store, then you can generally, design for print and just convert that to PDF.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine, because then anyone with a computer screen, anyone with a laptop, anyone with a tablet can take the PDF and read it normally like they would a book. Now, if you are considering accessibility via device, like if you want to move it to EPUB, if you want to, have it more easy to read on a device or have it indexed on a device, that's when you have to have alternate layouts while you're doing the design. So you'll have like your principal layout, and then you'll want to have a secondary layout kind of on the side. And InDesign and other programs have the capability of doing this, of having alternate layouts where you can have a totally different setup for your design elements and everything, but then have the text flow in as if it were its own book, and without having to redo the whole thing from scratch.
Okay, so it's sort of like when people optimize a web page for like mobile,
Yeah, yeah,
right? The
similar
same
process.
information, it's just formatted slightly differently and presented slightly differently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've got this PDF. I've said, hey, I'd like to hire somebody like, oh, maybe Jean-Alix to come here and reorganize this PDF that I have. Let's say it's like a couple hundred pages, 300 pages, whatever.
Mhm.
And it needs to be more accessible for people who use, say, screen readers or, text to voice or something. What do you do differently? And why is it different in a PDF than in some other type of format?
So you mentioned a lot of things, and there are a lot of
Oh,
things
yeah.
to consider right there. So there's, for screen reading, that goes off of a technology called OCR. And OCR is going to read the text and translate it into a voice on the device. And what's important there is font selection. You don't want to use like a kooky crazy font that's, it might look really pretty or whatever, but the OCR may not be able to read it correctly, and you're going to get garbled text coming through. So you got to be careful for that kind of stuff.
Okay.
When it comes to when you're doing your font selection, your layouts, your layout design for a different device, again, think about font size, think about font choice, and how those things are going to read differently. Because if you take for instance, for Coyote and Crow, we used Quiza Pro at 14 point. That was what we start. That was the baseline, and it's a great font for print. But if you use 14 point, on a smartphone, you're only going to read like 10 pages or 10 words a page.
Right.
So so you have to consider not only how it's going to fit, but also how well it is to read. Because again, you're going to have people who have vision impairment. You're going to have people who have different size devices, that
Right.
are going to display it differently. So you have to make sure that your text is still legible and still readable, and pleasing to read at as many device sizes as you can possibly make it.
So do you have like a desk full of devices and you look at each of those, yeah, it looks pretty good. Yeah, it looks pretty good.
That's a great thing to have, but not everybody has that. So fortunately, there is device emulation out there.
Okay.
And then also, like, if you're using InDesign, or if you're using Affinity Publisher or something like that, they have like preset device sizes where you can say, okay, what's the typical pixel dimensions for a Galaxy S series? And,
Right.
they'll have that. It's
Okay.
it's all
So
available to you.
you can kind of mock up what it would look like
Yeah.
depending on the screen size or the aspect ratio or whatever.
Right. And then, if while you're in the design phase, if you wanted to test it out, you can always, export to PDF or export to EPUB and plop it on the device to see how it looks,
Right.
if you have it available to you.
So before we mentioned OCR, optical character recognition, and does reading off a PDF use that, or is it different reading off a PDF?
No, Adobe has an OCR built into it.
Okay.
There are third parties that have, if you say, okay, I want to take whatever app you have and point it at a PDF on your device, it can do that separately, or Adobe can do it, built in.
Right. So one thing I remember from, just ed tech stuff, I'm a teacher, um, was like in Kurzweil, we had to like lay out all the columns properly or it would
Mm.
read really weirdly. Is that something that you're doing ahead of time? Or do people have to kind of, or does the software already interpret that? I don't know. I don't know. These are things
That
that doesn't know.
so Adobe's not going to reflow the text, as you know, what you're talking about flowing the text through a
Okay.
document. That's going to be fixed. However, if you are using, there are some devices that have text flow. I have an EPUB reader on my computer right now, and it depending on the book and how, which book I'm reading, some of them have them set to reflow, and some of them don't.
Okay.
But I think most people prefer not to have text reflow, just because it can easily break the formatting of the book. So the text is generally fixed in the way it's designed initially.
Okay. So when you're making a PDF specifically for accessibility
Mhm.
and different types of devices and readers and whatnot, do you tend to like shy away from collimated text and all that kind of stuff that we think of as very normal in big laid out book?
Yeah, books like a regular 8.5 and 11 by 11 size book will generally be 2 columns. That's very common, because not only does it tend to the eye tends to flow a little better when you're looking at it that way, because the eye gets exhausted if it just goes all the
Left
way
to right all
across,
the time, yeah.
yeah. So giving it a little break and then doing it this way is good. 3 columns ends up usually kind of jumbling the eye a little bit. It's a little too much text for the brain to process all at once. That's why there's so many books like just default to 2 columns. And then it still leaves you some room for like sidebars and call outs and things like that. But when you're going onto a device, that's generally when when you're designing for a device, you generally want to go single column, because you don't want to have to be in a position where the user is having to scroll left, right to
Yes.
read the page. So you want to be able to scroll up and down in a uniform way in order to make the PDF read easier.
Right. And so this is where your printed book would have a different layout than
Hmm.
your PDF. Okay,
Right.
cool. So, I mean, that's pretty simple. I think I could do that. I might be able to do something like that. But tell me, what are some of the really like rich features in a PDF that people might not know about, think about, but that could really impact how their users could access or interface with this piece of writing.
Okay, so for the prospective publishing designers out there, it is not enough for me as a customer, as a reader. It's not enough for me to just have the book in PDF format. There's some features that are available in PD in Acrobat that really make PDFs a valuable standalone product or a companion product to a book.
Right.
To start with, index your chapters and sections correctly. You can use the whole bookmark section to organize and lay those out and link them to the correct page. So that way, if I want to go to chapter 3, section 3.6, I can just go, expand the file tree there, go boom, boom, and just press the button. I'm exactly at the point where I need to be. I don't have to, tab through looking for a specific page, right? Nobody
Right.
wants to do that. And then you have a technology barrier there, because some people don't have devices that are fast enough to do,
Right.
to flip through pages that quickly. So indexing your PDF at the front, very, very important.
All right.
Indexing
Index.
it,
Got it.
yeah, indexing it at the rear as well. So if it, in I have a bone to pick with certain publishers who don't put indexes at the back of their books, but put indexes at the back of your books. Develop a keyword map, do all your indexing. Nobody likes to do it. It's time consuming and it's tedious, but holy smokes, it's very important to have that in a PDF, because if I'm in the back of the book and I need to look up, we're at the table, we're like, who, goodness, what's the rule for this particular thing? Like I have toughness or whatever. I don't remember how that works. So instead of having to control F toughness, go through the page by page, I should be able to go back to the index, find it on the index, click it with my mouse and pointer, and it will jump to the page, or at least the first page where that word appears.
Right.
So the indexing, both the table of contents and the actual index, super super important. But
Right. I was just gonna say, can't you just like reproduce the table of contents? But it's actually different. Like you're talking about
yeah,
like itemized by word,
you
right? Like an
can do
actual
that too.
index.
Yeah, like you can, because what I'll see, it depends on the publisher. Like sometimes there's no table of contents at the front, right? Electronically, I mean. So
Right.
it'll be there on the page, but if it's on page 20, I still have to go and type in
And flip through
20,
all the pages.
the and then pray that they actually numbered the book correctly, which
Right.
sometimes doesn't happen because your numbering changes when you include your front matter and your cover. So you
Right.
have to be mindful of that. But if you have the table of contents, sometimes I see it's only the chapters. Like Coyote and Crow only has 4 sections, and I say only because there's like 22 chapters,
Right.
and it's broken down by section, then by chapter, and then we have kind of like subsections. So if I just had section 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a 480-page book, that's not terribly
That's
helpful,
not helpful.
right? So
It's
having
somewhere
it,
within these 100 pages. And if it's not there, it's in the next 100 pages. Promise.
maybe. So yeah, so that's why I say indexing the table of contents is so important, and then indexing the actual index also very important. Getting your page numbers right also very important.
Right. And that's something anybody who has access to Acrobat could do. It, like you said, it's just time
Yes,
consuming to index
right.
or
Well,
make a table of contents.
the indexing process really happens in your design program, so probably either in InDesign or whatever you're using.
Oh, okay.
But then there's the secondary step of having it when you bring it to PDF, making sure that your keyword map gets picked up correctly, and checking to make sure that the links are there. Because a lot of times what happens is it'll pick up the wrong keywords, or they'll be out of order or something. So
Right.
it takes a little extra time to go to the PDF and just do a little QA and make sure it's
Yeah, you
all
got to
right.
check it. Got to
Right,
check it.
exactly.
It's like any editing process.
In
Cool.
any
Okay, so
editing
indexing.
process.
Got it.
Yeah.
What next? What's after that? What should we do?
Gosh, if there's we could talk about this all day.
That's we
So
got 30 minutes.
so if again if you're just getting into this, let me give you here's a little piece of advice. Learn JavaScript. You
Oh,
will
really?
you will thank yourself for spending the effort and time to learn JavaScript, because you can script things in PDFs and really unlock the potential of your
Okay, I did
PDF.
not know that. Wow.
Yes. Uh,
So tell me like what's a script that you could that you've done? Say into
so
the Code and Crow PDF.
if you download the official Coyote and Crow PDF character sheet, it is form fillable.
Yes.
There are a few hundred lines of JavaScript in there that auto calculate everything on the sheet based on the Coyote and Crow
Oh.
rulebook.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
is
I did not know that
that
was
was a
that.
week long labor of love for me, but I did it.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's something that takes it takes a little bit of practice. But nobody speaks in code, trust me. Every coder is going to have a code book open so that they can they can reference the syntax and the words they need to reference. But getting familiar with JavaScript and being able to at least look at the documentation and be like, okay, that's how I want to do this, is super important. Because when you have a system like Coyote and Crow that has a specific way of calculating stats, it's not simple addition and subtraction, then having that scripted in it is going to make the player's life so much easier, especially when you have somebody like me who has dyscalculia. Probably not even, I'm butchering that, but I invert numbers.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons I became an artist, is because I fail math. I can't do it because if I'm doing math quickly, I get confused, and the numbers literally invert when I'm writing them down, transcribing them. So you're going to have people who have difficulty with math. So
Sure.
having that auto calculate, huge advantage for you
Yeah,
as a
and I
game.
mean, it just makes it lowers that barrier to play immediately,
Exactly.
right?
Right. Again, getting as many people to the table with the least amount of pain as possible. That's the goal.
Now, for like other types of tabletop games, like board games and card games, where it's not that important to do that, you could probably do like a score sheet or something that calculated all this kind of stuff. You know, how many science cards you have versus how many
Yeah.
agriculture cards you have, and all these things. I'm sure you could do that too, which would be
Yeah,
cool.
and if you're diving a little bit more into like the UX design world, which really doesn't if the Venn diagram of graphic designers and UX designers was here, it'd be about 50-50 at least, right?
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Yeah. So learning UX can also expand your not only your skill set, but your hireability, your attractiveness to recruiters. And if you look at something, you brought that up, and it immediately made me think of Descent, the new Descent
Yeah.
game, where it used to be kind of PvP, where you had one player was the warlord trying to defeat the players who are running through the dungeon. Now it's a co-op game. There's no overlord player. It's just 2 to 4 players versus the app,
Yeah.
right? And the app is not that complex. It's just the grid of the game with a very simple enemy AI, prioritizing attacks and movement across the grid. So if you can learn even a little bit of that, I mean, that can make you can turn a regular board game into an experience.
Mhm. That's really cool. Okay, so we got indexing, we've got learning a little JavaScript. What's next? What else could people do to help other people? Okay, we talked about font selection too. We talked
Yeah.
about reducing the number of columns. What's something else we could do to help
So
people access this
it,
better?
when it came to Coyote and Crow, I'm using this as a very specific example because of the way this came about. When Connor gave me the design brief for the core rulebook, he was very vague about the aesthetic. Right? He kind of knew the vibe he wanted, but he didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. But he was very specific about the accessibility. He's like, I want to make sure that people who are dyslexic, people who are colorblind or color deficient, or just people who have just difficulty reading, vision difficulties, anything like that, to be able to read this book. And I said, I am all in. So there was a long process of just selecting the font, just settling on Quiza Pro was like a week-long process. Because when you're proofing against dyslexia, you have to check against characters that commonly get inverted, like B and D lowercase, or the PQ and G. Those commonly get flipped, and that's one of the reasons why dyslexia has many uh, aspects to it, and there's not just one kind. But that's one of the more common ways that people with dyslexia have difficulty reading. So we wanted to make sure we selected a font that had features in it that allowed the eye and the brain to distinguish between those letters easily, and also were just more visible in general. So I'm going to get a little technical. So one of the other things I liked about Quiza is that Quiza has a high X height, which is like if you look at a lowercase letter, you've got like a B and you got the bowl, right? That's the counterform. So that X height is very tall compared to other fonts, right? So it allows for the eye to have to kind of like take a bigger bite out of the word, so to speak. So I tested a number of fonts, and Quiza just kind of hit all the notes. And it also has a full font family. It has 16 different font styles within it.
Right.
So we went with that. And again, he said 14 point was the minimum, and that has to do with people with vision difficulty. Because the usual reading type usually is about 10 points, but people who have vision impairment can have difficulty reading even at that size.
Right.
So we went up to 14 point to kind of strike a balance between readability and not making the book like 1,000 pages.
How much do you think you added to the size of the book by going up like those 2 to 4 points?
It was a lot.
Yeah.
I did not test it. I could have. I did not. But I mean, if you think about it this way, it's a two-dimensional object, right?
Yeah.
So if you go from 10 to 14, you're increasing it by 40%. You're not
Right.
just increasing it by 40% this
It's
way. You're
also
also this way.
yeah.
So it was a lot. And I commend Connor for really committing to adding that page count, because that came out of the coffers, from the Kickstarter, and it was important enough to him to say, I'm willing to spend the considerable extra expense to make this a larger book, to make it more accessible to to everyone.
Right. No, that's really interesting. So you're saying font choice took you guys about a week,
Yeah.
and then and then it was like off to the races.
For the most part, design can sometimes publication design can sometimes be a little bit like building the plane while you're flying it.
Yeah.
But really, when it comes down to it, there's certain things you want to automate on the front end, so that you can worry about the details later. So, making sure that you have the actual physical page design, chapter by chapter, section by section, done, agnostic of the text. That's really important because you don't want to be building it page by page. You want to have the skeleton of the book built and then be able to dump the text in later. And this is
Right.
especially true if you're using InDesign, because InDesign actually has kind of like a subprogram called InCopy that allows you to have editors check out the text from the whole project and make edits or write more material and then check it back in. Then the designer loads it and it reflows the text automatically.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's kind of a way of having, because in the old days it used to be the text of the book had to be done
Like
and
locked.
locked down. So you because once you started laying it out, if you changed anything, you had to go back to where that change was and reflow the whole thing. Not the case anymore. InDesign can do that kind of in flight, while the book is being laid out, if the editors have to come in and make changes or additions. So that's not an accessibility thing. That's just more of like
Make
making
life
your
easier
life
for you thing.
less miserable as a designer, right? But yeah, so font choice is a big thing, but also one of the things I did a lot of in my career was testing as color blindness.
Right.
Because I used to work for a period of time. I worked for a company that trained people on industrial safety.
Right.
I was
Which is
the I
like
was
important stuff.
Oh yeah, safety is it's a right. Everyone has a right to be safe when they go to work, and doing heavy machinery or oil field drilling, whatever, very dangerous jobs. So having the safety information not only absolutely accurate and 100% correct, but also visible, because there's a language barrier when you're talking about safety design, because not everyone is going to speak the same language at a work
Right.
site. So signage has to be visible, to the eye, via symbolism or by color, or really both, because sometimes you're going to have people who are color deficient or colorblind. So one of the things that I do just naturally is I test all of my designs against color blindness. There's actually multiple kinds of color blindness.
Sure.
Because if we think back to like third grade, fourth grade science, right? There's the rods and the cones in the eye. The rods, is it the rods or the cones that read color? I've already forgotten.
I think the cones.
So, but there's three different kinds, right? There's red, green, and blue, right? So if one of those types it doesn't work correctly, you have color blindness. So you have people who can't see the blue part of the spectrum very well. So you have that type of color blindness. People who can't see the green part of the spectrum, you have that kind of color blindness. So I should say
Right.
color deficiency. So when you're designing, if you're using color and as part of the way to navigate the reader through your book or through your game, then making sure that they can still see the contrast between the colors means everything. Especially like if you have a board game or a card game that relies on color, like say Magic, uh, 5 colors, right?
Yes.
um, Making sure that those colors are distinguishable, and if not the colors, then the designs that those colors are imprinted on, making those distinguishable by people who have color deficiency is the difference between having that customer and not having that customer. You
Right.
know, because if I can't tell the difference between red and yellow or red and green when I'm playing your game, how am I supposed to play your game if those
Yeah.
colors are important? You know,
Yeah. And so I mean, there's a lot of the color and the iconography and all these things, the text size, that like this is intent and purposeful design, right? Just as much as the game itself has intentional design. Um, so for those types of things, now you're testing it electronically or in print, and has that ever differed between how people look at it on the screen versus how people read it on paper, for the PDF version versus the print version, the colors or anything like that?
well, When it comes to color, there's always going to be a difference between monitors. Devices are just going to be naturally different, just depending on the
Yeah.
manufacturer. So when it comes to stuff like that, like contrast is key, right? You don't want to have two colors that might get a little muted and start to blend together, on an older screen, because then you're talking about financial barriers to your game, right? Well, do I need to have like the newest monitor from Best Buy in order to read this book, or can I read it on a 10-year-old device, that I got at the secondhand store, because you don't want to leave anybody out for any reason, no matter what their situation is.
Right. And
So
do you find PDFs are generally really good about like backwards compatibility and all that kind of stuff?
yeah, PDF is designed to be a universal format. If
Right.
you have Acrobat Reader, as long as it's the current version of Acrobat Reader, which almost any device in service will have, it should be able to read it. And if you want, when you make your PDF, you can make it backwards compatible to older versions of Adobe
Oh, really? Okay.
Acrobat.
That's really
Yes,
cool.
yeah. So there are distinct steps in the evolution of Acrobat. And if you want to go back to the whatever version was available in 2010, you can do
Yeah,
that.
you could do that. It
Yeah.
might lose some functionality, but
Right. Yeah, for the most part, it should still be safe. Like you start losing some of the automation and scripting capabilities,
right.
but
Okay.
as far as just like displaying text and graphics, it should work just fine.
Okay, very cool. Um, okay, so now we've got our font, we've got colors locked down, we've got columns, we've got all that. What's next in our path to create like the best PDF ever?
You want people who are smarter than you. I know that sounds silly, but a lot of design houses, independent publishers are relying on one designer.
Right.
And that sometimes that's all they have access to. But if you're the designer, it's in your best interest to have somebody who has been in the industry for a long time, even if it's not in gaming, just in publications or
Right.
graphic design for a long time, that you can bounce the idea off of. Say, hey, look, can I pay you $20 to just proof this for me and make sure I'm not missing anything? It's super super important because we don't always think about how other people see the world. It's easy to say I want to make this as accessible as possible, but if you're not having the lived experience of a person with a disability or any kind of learning difficulty or whatever the challenge is, then you don't really truly understand what their challenges are.
Right.
So
You
seeking
kind of
out
got to
those
ask them.
people, exactly. So if it's seeing somebody, talking to someone who's more experienced, who has gone through these design challenges, or maybe consulting a sensitivity counselor, sensitivity advisor, to go over your material. That's all a great thing to have in the quiver, when you're before you go to press and send it out to the world.
Right. Okay, so we got smarter people looking over our stuff. We've got some automation in JavaScript. We've got all this stuff going on. Is now when we say this is done, publish it.
It's fun. It's funny because we spend all this time talking about the electronic aspect of design, but one of the most basic things that some of the most basic things that need to be remembered get forgotten about in the process. If you are a new designer and you are designing with the intent to print, do everything in CMYK. I'm begging you.
Oh my gosh.
Do not do anything in RGB or any other color space. Start in CMYK. If you're contracting out illustrators to do illustrations for the book, ask them to also design in CMYK. You will thank me later, because you don't want to send your stuff to the press and have it looking funky because all the colors got rearranged during the color conversion process.
It is really quite amazing. Like there's been a lot of people who, I'm a graphic designer, I could do this. And it's like, okay, yeah, but have you ever done print? Like, oh no. Okay,
Right.
then no, we're not working with you yet until you've done some print stuff because we don't
Yeah.
want to be your mistake.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider when designing for print that if you've never designed for print, you don't think about. Things like making sure that all your book has a sufficient bleed
Right.
on all the pages, making sure that you're abiding by the printer's live area. to make so that your text and your art don't get cut off when the book gets cut and printed. Um, making sure that your colors aren't too saturated and the ink doesn't bleed through the pages.
Oh my
You know,
gosh.
yeah, I mean these are. It's so funny because I've been in publications for 22 years, and I when I started, the CMYK was all there was.
Oh yeah.
There HTML was taking baby steps. So we didn't really know much about electronic design. So for me, when
Oh,
I
other than
come,
the other than like the logos that would spin and things like that. Do you remember those?
sure, yeah, like the really old like computer graphics stuff, yeah.
They were great.
um, but graphic design hadn't really made it to the web and to the larger electronic formats yet. So for me, like it's natural to design in CMYK. But you're right. You have a lot of designers who come up, maybe are self-taught. Maybe you just went through a shorter program that didn't have the exposure to CMYK and designing for print, and they don't know anything about that kind of stuff. And there's a learning curve where if you don't know that stuff, then like you said, like a book publisher may be like, sorry, like we don't have the time to retrain you on how to design for press. Yeah.
Well, especially a freelancer. There's
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I
there's
mean, as
no
a
way.
freelancer, you just have to keep learning, right? Like,
Yeah.
no matter what it is, learn something new every single day and create, and make sure you're creating outside of your comfort zone. Because the only way you're going to improve.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I think there's and that's kind of why I wanted you on the show today, is because like this is an area that I should know, but I don't know anything about.
Yeah. Sure.
You know, combining my job with my D&D and role playing games and all that kind of stuff. I should know more about these accessible PDFs than
Mhm.
I do. And so just having you on the show is giving me ideas about well, what could we do to make our games more accessible to people who are doing it off of an e-reader or a screen reader or
Mhm.
their laptop or their phone or their tablet or whatever instead of the paper version. Um, just because I always buy hardback copies of everything doesn't mean everybody's going to do that. Doesn't mean everybody can afford
Sure.
that even, right? Because they're expensive.
Right.
You got to ship that stuff.
Mhm.
Um, the One of the neat things I found, I mean, this is quite early on. I can't remember. I think it's sitting over there in my shelf. There's one game, and I don't remember what it was, that was written like it was a PDF, and
Mhm.
you could tell because it was like everything was where it was supposed to be, like multiple times. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but it's that type of thing where um, if you read it linearly, you would not understand it. But if you're thinking about it as an electronic product, it's like, oh, that makes
Mhm.
sense. These are these places multiple times.
I see. Yeah. So it's kind of like it wasn't written in sequence to be read front to back. It was more
No.
like, here's the information. Let me just organize it in a,
Yeah,
the
in a way
difference.
that it was probably great for searching and
Yeah.
probably great for that kind of stuff. But do you have any recommendations about that? Like, is it just like write it like it's supposed to be read, or should the different products have different flows to the
You
content
know,
even?
that's an interesting question because it kind of depends on the intent of the game, right? Like a tabletop RPG is almost naturally going to want to flow more like a book because there's story element as well as rules that go into it. And then you're going to have stuff that you want to segregate from the rest of the book, like the storyteller stuff. That should be different from the player stuff. The if you have a pre-written adventure, that should be separate from everything else. But if you have like something like a rule book, I'm thinking like Twilight Imperium, maybe like something just has a lot of rules,
Mhm.
but doesn't necessarily have to be read in order. I can see how what you're talking about would actually be an advantage, where like a keyword or a key rule might be explained multiple times throughout the text, just because it's relevant in multiple places as you're reading the rules. So
Yeah,
it really depends.
I actually subscribe to that kind of writing in some very specific rules, where like I would call it out at the beginning. I would maybe have it in a sidebar, and then I might put it in the appendix, right? And then
Mhm.
it'd be indexed or whatever. But this had it like all the time. There's like I can remember like certain lines of text were repeated like 17 times throughout this whole thing
Mhm.
because it needed to be there. If somebody was looking for it, that's where it should be. And it's like, where does that stop and where does that end? And is this a functionality thing, or like a searchability thing, or what is it?
Yeah.
Um, so I wondered if it was just because it was the PDF version that I printed, because I printed it all out instead of I think I wasn't able to buy the hardcover because it was like a real indie thing, and they only printed so many, so I just had to get the PDF and then I printed
Yeah.
it out. And it's like, oh, this is weird to read. So
Yeah,
maybe
I
this
guess
is
that would be a question for the
whoever wrote it.
copywriter, yeah, or the tech writer, whoever wrote it. 'Cause yeah, that's a writing question as opposed to a design question.
Yeah, I think so
I'd be
too.
interested to see it. Interested
I
to hear
think
the
you're
answer to
right. I
that.
think you're right. All right. So, hey, we talked a whole lot, and I didn't know we'd have this much to talk about, but it was great talking to you.
Yeah,
I think I learned a ton. I hope all the viewers learned a ton, and that we might be able to think about how do we add accessibility features to even like the simplest of like rules. Like some of our rule books are like 3 pages long, some of them are 50 pages long, some of them are multiple hundreds of pages long for RPGs and whatnot. But I think all of them deserve that same look that you've given Coyote and Crow, for example, where yes, it turned out to be, multiple hundreds of pages, probably about 40% more than it would at, 10 point font.
yeah,
Um, but the idea that um, it doesn't have to be huge to deserve this treatment, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
And I think that it might even be easier for some of us self-publishers to start with something small, learn the ropes of, okay, how do I make this? How do I index this? How do I write this little script to make this, form fillable thing do some math? How do I do that in this small like 25 pager versus like a 500 pager or whatever, right? So I think that's where I'd like to take this, and I challenge some of the viewers. Hey, if you're writing some rules and they're in PDFs, look at how you're doing things. Look at your font selection. Look at your colors. Look at all these things that Jean-Alix has talked about today. Okay, cool. So let's roll through our little credits here. We have, if you'd like to reach Jean-Alix, you can reach them at Lost Cartographers Guild gmail.com. That's right there, with a lot of periods in between things.
yeah, yeah.
Although I believe it'll probably
Yeah, and
all the
that's, you
other
know
ones
what,
are actually just like weird little markers.
that's actually, and that's a visual design choice too. It's like if it's just a string of letters, it's more difficult to read than if you have punctuation between them.
100%. Have you
Yeah.
seen? I thought I was thinking about this when we were talking earlier. Have you seen the bionic reading thing?
Yes, and I have opinions.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah, I think it needs to be rigorously tested
Yeah,
before we could say anything definitively.
yeah. Oh, hey, I've switched where things are coming up. Let's take a look where things are coming up here. I probably should have put them before, but whatever. Here we go. What's going on? We have Molly Johnson, Robert Melvin, Sean Stankovic coming in next week on June 15th from Flat Out Studios. And oddly enough, the week after that, we have their stablemate, Randy Flynn, coming in. Randy is coming in on the 22nd at 10 p.m. I mean, when you're a Spiel des Jahres nominee, we'll give you an extra hour at the end. We'll rearrange a little bit of time for you when you get that nomination for the Game of the Year from Germany. And then our last show of the season is on June 29th. Molly's F, Flying Leap Games, coming to talk about how to make party games. So then it will be summer break, and we'll be starting up again in September when Alara, myself, and Erica kind of get our heads together. So that's what's going on. That's what we're going to see in the future. So hopefully you'll be here to see that with us. All right. Let's see what else we have to talk about. Oh, if you want to find me, you can find me at SenFongLim on Twitter. Erica is at Erica Buyuris, the only one I know with that name, actually. Same with me. I'm the only one with that name. And then Alara is at TT Void. On Twitter, you can reach us all at Meeple Syrup. If you'd like to support the show, keep the lights on, you can reach us at patreon.com/MeepleSyrup and support the show at whatever tier pledge you would like. And hey, we've come to that point in the show where we're going to get some final advice from Jean-Alix. But Jean-Alix has something actually special to show. So I'm going to
Yeah.
show that right here. and it's going to be giant because it deserves to be giant.
Thank you.
And you can narrate this. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this I feel like this whole conversation was about advice, right? So we can skip that now. Just to say for the for the lawyer, I'm not here as a representative of Wizards of the Coast. We were here to talk about Coyote and Crow. However, as a queer gamer and a queer designer, it's very important to me to put this out in front. Wizards of the Coast did a select small series of cards called a Secret Lair Drop. They do these frequently for like different artists and whatnot. But specifically this year, we did one called Pride Across the Multiverse. And this celebrates all of the LGBT characters and stories throughout the Magic the Gathering universe. So this is a very cool alternate art set for certain select cards. And the reason why I'm pushing this is because half of your purchase goes directly to the Trevor Project, which
Yeah.
is basically a crisis counseling organization for LGBT people. So you will literally save lives with your purchase of this product. Some of it goes to the production cost, the rest goes directly to the Trevor Project. So please consider supporting this. It's very important to us. My teammates were the leads on this project, and there are a lot of LGBT people at Wizards, and it's all very important to us that these kind of things get support because it's important to our lives and our rights and our existence. So yes, please check it out. We'd love to see it.
There you go. So that's a Secret Lair drop from Wizards of the Coast. And again, 50% of each purchase of Pride Across the Multiverse goes to the Trevor Project, which is the world's largest suicide prevention hotline and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ plus young people in crisis. So there you go. Support, please. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, that's it for the show. We have a lot coming up. Well, we only have 3 more weeks till we're in summer, and then we're all on kind of hiatus while I go back to work. And I've been on my vacation, and I think Erica and Alara will have their little vacations, and we'll be back in full force in September. So thank you very very much, Jean-Alix, for coming on and giving us the lowdown on PDFs and how we can make them even just one step more accessible. I think that's kind of this weird thing. Like, it's not all or nothing. It's not like 100% all the way. We have to do 1,000 things. We can do little bits. We can learn in steps. We can get better with time. Would it be nice if we could do all of it at once? Yes, of course it would. But how about even if you can't, you at least make some steps towards making your products more accessible for the people who want to play the games that you make? Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. We will see you next week on the show. Hopefully Alara or Erica will be around. I know you get bored of just seeing me, but you got to see Ijana Lee today, so that's pretty cool. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you next week. Have a great night. Bye.